As most of you know, right after the start of World War II, the Japanese emperor sent me an invitation that I could not turn down. So I went over and stayed with him as his guest for the next 3 years and 8 months. Most of the information about POWs is not published. The only way we've ever been able to hear about it is recently with the thing over in Iraq. We've got a lot of publicity from the treatment of POWs. And I'd like to tell you what we went through during the 3 years and 8 months I was a prisoner in Japan. To start out with, when I was 21 years old, I was working in a CC camp as a mess sergeant. I was making $45 a month and was sending 25 of that home to my parents. Left me $20 to spend. On July the 6th, a representative from Morrison Knudsen called the CCC camp and wanted 4 volunteers to finish out a labor quota they had on Wake Island. They offered $125 a month, and all we had to do was work 48 hours a week. It sounded like a good deal. We never knew where Wake Island was, but the next morning we were on the bus headed for San Francisco. We went by ship to Wake Island, arriving out there on August the 2nd. I got a job on Wake Island working on the night shift in a warehouse. We were making airport runways and submarine refueling bases. I worked to pile lumber out for the crews that worked the next day, and also help unload ships as they came in. On the morning of December the 8th, we were across the international date line. We received word that the Japs were bombing Pearl Harbor. We all hollered about that and talked about it and figured that it was right when they said the Japs were bombing Pearl Harbor instead of Japanese. So I ate breakfast and went to bed, laid there, and they kept talking on the porch, kept me awake all morning, talking about the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor. And I thought, well, that's the silliest thing I ever heard of, that the Japs would bomb Pearl Harbor. So about 11:45, I decided I might as well get up and go eat lunch. So I pulled on my pants, and just as I got my pants on, I heard an explosion. I ran outside to see what was going on, thinking it was the Americans exploding something to see what we would do in case of war. And I got outside, and a squadron of planes was coming right toward our camp. And I waited and I watched until I saw the rising sun on the wing, and then I knew I was in trouble. I started to look for some place to hide, and about that time I caught a machine gun bullet in my left arm. They flew on over, circled around and started back toward us. So I crawled underneath a dump truck right up underneath the motor. I figured they wouldn't shoot me there. So I could see the bullets pop as they flew back over, and they flew away. I got up, and I was right close to the hospital. So I went over to the hospital. They wrapped up my arm and gave me a tetanus shot. I walked back outside, and as I did, they were backing pickups in to the hospital. They had picked up, we had no ambulances, and they had picked up the man that had got hit over on the Pan Am Air Base and bringing him over in the back of a pickup. And I foolishly walked over to see what was happening. And I walked over, and they were up there, said, oh, this arm belongs to this body over here. This intestine belongs to this body. And I just froze. Finally, some guy come along and he said, if you're not going to work, get out of the road so somebody can. And they took, when they sorted the bodies out, they took those that they thought were dead, they took, just laid them on the side, along the sidewalk, and those they thought they could help, they took into the hospital. After I left there, I met up with the 4 guys that I had went over with, and we picked up one more guy. There was 400 Marines on the island and 1,200 civilians. And the commander sent out word that he didn't have time to babysit with civilians, that we were to get shovels and go out and dig foxholes and crawl in them and stay there. So we went out, dug a foxhole big enough for 5 of us, took a bunch of candy bars along so we'd have something to eat, camouflaged the foxhole, and crawled in. The next morning, the military sent out word that they wanted all able-bodied men to help. One of the guys with us said, well, we're not in the military, why should we help? Another said, you're an American, and this is an American fight. Get out there and help. So I went out and volunteered to work on the 3-inch guns, anti-aircraft guns. Each time the Japanese would come over and bomb us, they would take pictures of where the anti-aircraft fire was coming from. So that night we would go out, tear down all the sandbags around the 3-inch guns and move them, put the camouflage back around them, and then rebuild the turret where we had left. And the next day they came over and they would bomb out the empty sandbag. We never lost a 3-inch gun during the war. On the morning of the 11th, the Japanese steamed in with 8 ships. They came right up to the island. They had no air cover, just like they were going to steam in and take us over. When they got close enough, they lowered the 5-inch guns, and the first shot, they blew one of them right out of the water. They must have hit a munitions dump. They just blowed it completely up. They damaged several others, and they turned and ran. So every day except Saturday, they bombed us. They bombed us twice on Sunday. And when we turned back those ships was actually the first winning battle of the World War II. On the morning of December the 23rd, on the night of the 22nd, I helped finish moving the guns and was starting back toward my dugout, and a Marine said, "What are you doing out here alone?" Said, "The island is alive with Japs. Get into headquarters dugout." So I got in headquarters dugout. The next morning, when sunlight came, we could count 40 ships around the island. And there was wave after wave of plane coming, and there was a lot of fire and bombing. And we waited till the commander gave orders to surrender. And I went up with a Marine and put a sheet up on a flagpole on the headquarters building. And then we went back down. We waited for the firing to stop. And once it quieted down, they ordered us out, and we went out to a bus stop close to the road and waited for the Japanese to come in and take us over. That when they approached us, they had bayonets attached to their gun. They were goose-stepping up and pointing their bayonets at us and the guns. The first thing they done was to search us. They took every watch, ring, anything we had that was metal, took the coins out of our pockets, took the paper money and threw it away, and then they made us take off all of our clothes, stripped us down, let us put our shoes back on, and they marched us out to the airport. I got out there about noon. By late evening, they figured that they had all of the prisoners that they were going to take. They thought they'd captured everybody on the island. Their commander gave orders, and they took the machine guns and set up in front of us. He barked another set of orders. They came back in. They got the clips. They went up and put the clips in the machine guns. And Major Devereaux got up and talked to their commander and asked him what their intentions were. And they'd never taken prisoner, had no intentions of taking prisoner. They were just going to open fire with the machine guns and kill us all right there. So he talked them into wiring Tokyo to see if they could take us prisoner. So they agreed to do that, but they kept the machine guns trained on us, and we sat out there until late the 25th, and they got orders that they could take us prisoner. During that time, they brought out a few loaves of bread that didn't go around, and they brought out water in gasoline tanks that we couldn't drink. So late Christmas Day, they decided to take us prisoner and let us go back into our barracks. We went back to the barracks. They told our cooks that they could cook us a meal, but it had to be one dish. They couldn't have a full meal, and it had to be served in the barracks. So they made a big pot of rich cheese soup-like, and we ate that. They put barbed wire entanglement around our camp, and they kind of left us alone until January the 11th. On January the 11th, they came out with a set of orders that we were to be transported someplace the next day. And they were very kind and generous people, and it was their hope that they didn't have to kill us all. But anything that we done outside of what they told us to do would be punishable by death. And they gave us a list of stuff that we were not to do, not to talk, not to grab for food that wasn't ours, not to grab for extra blankets. So the next morning, we were getting ready to go. One of my buddies said, we better take a bath this morning. This may be the last time we have a chance to take a bath for a long time. And we kind of laughed about it. Went ahead and took a bath. They told us to pack up everything we had and take it with us. So we packed up everything, carried it down to the waterfront. We got to the waterfront and they said, put all your stuff in a pile here and you'll get it back when you get where you're going. I've never arrived where I was going yet because I've never got that package back. They brought a great big converted luxury liner, the Nita Maru, in, and it was so big they couldn't get it into our dock. So they anchored offshore. The water was rough. They loaded us on barges, took us out to the ship, and we had to jump from the barge and catch a rope net, crawl up the outside the ship, and crawl over the top. We got on top of the ship. The Japanese met us there and to give us orders. We couldn't understand their language and they didn't try to speak ours. They gave us directions by kicking us, hitting us, pushing us, shoving us, or whatever. We went down narrow hallways to the front of the ship. They showed us a ladder. We had to crawl down a steel ladder about 40 feet down in the baggage hold on a steel deck. They gave each they packed us in there till we didn't have enough room to lay down. They gave us 2 blankets apiece. Twice a day, they would lower down a half a pint of barley soup and a half a pint of water for each person. They put 5-gallon cans, 2 5-gallon cans in the corner for latrines. When they got full, they would drop down a rope and we would tie the rope onto the can and they would pull it up and they would try to catch it on the ladder, so they spill a little of it on the people that were right underneath the ladder. After we had gone about 3 days with no food, there was nothing going in, we stopped going to the bathroom. And a lot of the guys complained that they were sick because they thought something was wrong with them. They wouldn't go to the bathroom. So they sent down a doctor. He brought down 2 henchmen with him. And if he would go and examine somebody and he thought that they were just complaining needlessly, he'd have those henchmen take a club and beat those guys till he just kept beating them. So they soon quit complaining about being sick. When we left Wake Island, the water was hot, and it was hot in the hold of the ship. We're like to smother to death. And we went through storms. The ship would pitch, come back down and flap the water. We thought we were being torpedoed because we were in an unmarked ship going through enemy territory. As we got closer to Japan, the water was cold. When we got into Yokohama, it was snowing and freezing there, and we were just about to freeze in the hold of that ship. They took 125 off there and left them in Japan, and to make good on their word that they would kill us if we did something wrong, they took 5 Marines up on deck and beheaded them and threw their bodies over in the bay. They battened the hatches back down and they took us back out to sea, another 6 days over to Wusong, China. We went up the Yangtze River and they put us off at Wusong. They unloaded us in front of a train station. We thought we were going some by train, but when they got us all unloaded, they started marching us out. We went about 6 miles to an old Chinese barracks that had been vacated for years. Windows were broken out. There was running water, supposedly, at the back of the camp, and the pipes worked. When the pump worked, or when the electricity was on, and sometimes we got enough water to wash the mess kits, but that was about all the water we got. And the water in China was unfit to drink. We couldn't drink it. In the barracks, we marched in. The barracks were separated into sections. Each section held 30 people. And the bunks were wooden bunks with a rice mat over the top of the wood. We were given 4 blankets of very poor quality, and a pillow that was a sawdust. It was filled with sawdust about that big around and about that long, with a canvas cover. And we were allowed 2 foot on the platform as our bed. They started feeding us that night. They went out They brought rice, or it was barley, with soybeans in it. They brought it over in buckets. We set at the end of the bed, and they gave us a teacup full, each person, 3 times a day. Sometimes they gave us stew. The stew sometimes had fish head, sometimes it was seaweed, and sometimes it was just mostly broth. And they gave us a cup of green tea. That's the only water we were allowed to drink. They, all of us were dressed in summer clothes, light clothes, and we kept complaining to the Japanese that we're freezing. So they finally took a group of men and went to the warehouse and bought Japanese summer uniforms out for us to wear. The Japanese are small people. Most of the uniforms hit us up here on the arm and high on the legs, but they were a lot better than what we had. They also brought 1 overcoat for every 30 men, and we voted in our section to give the overcoat to an old man that was there. He was probably about 45, but we agreed to give him the overcoat. And that night for inspection, interpreter comes through and he had on the overcoat. The interpreter said, "What for you wear overcoat?" He said, "I'm cold." He said, "It's wintertime, you're supposed to be cold." And he took his saber loose and he started beating him. He beat him down on the bed and kept beating. So he didn't wear his overcoat anymore. On April the 30th, we'd been there 3.5 months, they decided it was time for us to take a bath. We didn't have any toothbrushes, soap, razors, or anything. We just went dirty. And so they took and filled a vat with water and heated it. Gave us a little wooden bucket about that big around. You could dip in the vat, get water, and then you could soap your body down, and when you got done, you could take what water was left and rinse off with, and then you could jump into the tub and finish rinsing off. There was 1,800 in the camp, and by the time they got through, water was beginning to get pretty thick. They, after that, they decided that we better go to work. So they put us to work. We were leveled off a hill and filled in a gully. And the way we did that, they had a yo-yo pole between 2 of us with a grass mat on it. We would walk by, they would fill the mat up, we'd carry it over and dump it, go around in circles, just keep walking. So we got that all leveled out. They used it as a parade ground then. They moved us to another camp. We were closer to Shanghai. And there we dug a lake and built a miniature Mount Fujiyama in China as a commemoration of their taking over China. There the Red Cross found us and started bringing in truckloads of vegetables and cracked wheat. And the cracked wheat had been sent over there in '37, so it was mostly weevil. And when they took when they feed us wheat, they would take the rice or barley away from us and just let us, all we had was wheat. And when we first got it, we started trying to take the weevil out, but if it got too much trouble, we thought maybe it had some food value. So we continued, we just ate it as it came out. They were so mean to the Chinese that it was terrible. Went to work one morning, there was 3 young Chinese boys out digging a hole. 2 guards was standing there watching them. We heard 3 shots, and the guards come back giggling and talking together. so we knew what happened to them. I worked in China until until August of 1943, and they came and said that they was going to ship a bunch to Japan, and I figured that was a good deal. We'd go to Japan, we'd be closer to the supply line and might get better treatment. And it put us on a ship, and it took us 6 days to get back to Osaka, Japan. And there we moved into new barracks, which was good. They were still wooden platforms, and we had showers, running water for toilets, no heat, no shower. And they told us we would go to work in a shipyard. The only criteria for not going to work was having a temperature of above 104. If you're 103 and 9/10, you could work. So, went to work in the shipyard, and my job there was I was working on a forge, and we were shaping sides of the ship. We'd pull the big slab of steel onto the forge and get it red hot, and then there was 5 of us stood around with a sledgehammer, and as the foreman poked on the metal, that's where you were to hit. Had 8-pound sledgehammers. We stood there and beat it until it got cold enough that we couldn't bend it anymore. Then we put it back on and heat it some more. One time we were working at the forge, and they were making tools at the forge next to us. They brought a piece of metal to a point and then cut it off, and that point was red hot, flew through the air and caught me right there in the back of the hand. It went in deep enough that you could see it over here, but it didn't break through. And they took me over to the infirmary, took a pair of pliers and pulled that steel out and put a Band-Aid and a mercurochrome on it. And the American doctor said I should stay in from work. The Japanese said, no, he's got a left hand. Let him go to work. So I went to work. Before that would heal, all of that meat that was seared from that red hot piece of metal had to rot out of there. And I could see the tendon working in there, and it took like forever, but it finally healed over. And I never missed a day's work on that. One time I had a toothache, and I reported out for work, told them I had a toothache. So they sent me into the hospital, put me over the chair, and took a pair of pliers and went zing, zing, back out in line to go to work. We worked from daylight till dark, and we were supposed to have 2 days a month off to keep our clothes clean and things cleaned up. It's seldom we got the days off. One day they issued 3 cigarettes to us, and I thought it was more important that I eat and smoke. So there was a convict working on the same shipyard, and he had a real nice looking white rice ball with a few soybeans in it. So I traded him 2 cigarettes for the rice ball, and the only place that we could eat without being bothered or do anything was go to the latrine. So I put the rice ball under my coat, headed for the latrine. A little Japanese caught me, shook me down, took the rice ball, and he took a rope, tied a knot in the end of it, made me stand to attention, and he would take and he would swing that rope, and when it would wrap around my head and the knot would pop in my face, he would jerk it. He did that until he got tired. And that's the reason that I'm legally blind today as a result of that beating. We was working one day and we was moving a piece of steel, and it slipped and dropped on my left foot, and my foot swelled up. I couldn't put a shoe on it, so my buddies carried me to work, and when I got there, they put me out on the north side of a building. It was right at the 1st of January. It was freezing. I sat on the concrete on the north side of the building in the shade. They gave me a small hammer, and I busted up coke so it would go into the forges. And the Japanese rule, you couldn't wear gloves when you worked because you wear their gloves out. So I froze my left hand, froze my feet, and I sat out there and worked most of the month of January. About the 1st of February, I had pneumonia and a temperature of over 104, and they put me in the hospital. When you went in the hospital, they had no medication. They cut your rations to half, and all you had to do was try to get well. The guy that was in the bunk beside me in the hospital was a merchant marine who weighed 365 pounds when he was captured. At the time he was in the hospital, he had dysentery, and he had dropped to 85 pounds. You could take and put your fingers in between his ribs, never touch anything. He made it through. I'd been in the hospital. They found that my temperature was back to normal. They decided I had to go back to work. Well, from being in the hospital on half rations, beriberi had set in. That's a disease that the tissues of your body deteriorate and all the fluid goes down to the extremities. And my legs were swelled out like that. When I would just have to drag one foot after another, and I couldn't, it was almost impossible to go up the stairs. I'd have to drag one foot up and then drag the other up. And that was probably the lowest point of my life. I was not sure I was going to make it from there. But the middle of March, the Americans came over with 400 B-29s, and they started dropping incendiary bombs right at the corner of our camp. They dropped, I think, 29 bombs inside the camp. They burnt the fire station out that formed the corner of the camp. They burnt out the shipyard that we worked in, and they just kept going. They burned out over 2/3 of the city of Osaka that night, and it was a city of 3 million people. The one good thing that came out of it, they killed a horse right outside of our compound. We drug him in and butchered him, and we had a feast. We sat there for 2 weeks, and they decided to move us up to northwestern Japan and put us on a train. We traveled all day, and we got up there and moved into an old warehouse that they just had platforms for us to sleep on. There was dirt floor, there was fleas in the floor, bed bugs in the bed, and we had body lice in our clothes. It was almost impossible to get any sleep. We went to work in a steel mill, and The guards there were a different strain of Japanese than we'd ever seen before. They were great big 200-pound men, and they delighted in seeing how far they could knock us by hitting us with one blow. So they knocked us around quite a bit. One day we went out to work, and when time for lunch, they always locked us in a shed for us to eat our rice. That day, they didn't come back to get us until it was time to go in. And we started to walk in, and somebody asked the interpreter why we hadn't worked, and he said Honolulu had surrendered and they were celebrating. So that night, we went in. The next morning we got up. Every guard was a stranger to us. They changed every guard in the camp. And about mid-morning, an American plane flew over, and he dropped in a monkey wrench with a note on it that hostilities had ceased and they would be back to get us in a few days. So the next day, American planes flew over again, and they dropped in steel barrels with shoes and candy bars and split pea soup. The candy bars we just gobbled up, like pigs. Hadn't had anything that tasted good for so long, we just ate them. Split pea soup was a different story. It said it was for 6 servings. We had no way to heat it and no can opener. So I messed around and I finally beat a can of it open and ate it directly out of the can. And it tasted so good that I busted another can open and ate it too. The next 3 hours I spent in the latrine going at both ends, and I still don't eat split pea soup. We stayed there for 2 weeks, and they loaded us on a train, the Japanese did, and took us into Yokohama, turned us over to the Americans. First thing they done was delouse us, take everything, take all of our clothes, throw them away and give us new clothes. And I went out and went on a ship and was waiting for airplanes to take us home. And on the ship they closed the canteen and they just fed us very meager meals. And after I was on the ship for about 4 days, they decided that that ship had to go back to the States. So they took us to Guam and took us for a hospital, stayed there for checkups. And when they started to dock, somebody hollered over and told them that these guys are starving. Tell their cooks to get busy and cook them a good meal. Well, they fed us chicken. We averaged a half a pound of butter per person, and they fed us chicken till we stopped eating. And boy, I mean, that was really a good meal. We stayed there for 4 days and then came back to the United States. Got back to the United States October the 2nd, and I guess the most emotional part was coming under the Golden Gate Bridge and realizing that we were back home. When we got home, the Americans had no idea what to do with us. They treated us very good, and they done just what they would do for any other convict. They gave us enough money to buy a suit of clothes and a bus ticket back home to say goodbye. We didn't know it while we were prisoners, but when they started sorting us out after they had bombed Osaka, they put us in small camps. And their orders were that if the Americans started landing on Japan proper, they were to kill all POWs. So, thank goodness they dropped the atomic bomb and saved us of that. Also, we found out that we had left 350 of our skilled workers on Wake Island when we left. A little while later, they took 250 of them and took to Japan, left 100 on Wake. 2 of those tried to escape, and when it was evident that the Americans were going to take Wake Island back over, they marched those 98 out on the North Shore and mowed them down with machine guns, killed all 98 of them on the spot. I forgive the Japanese, but I still don't buy any more Japanese products than I have to. I believe the experience has made me a better man. Number one, I know what freedom is all about. You know, we sing songs about freedom, and everybody knows they enjoy freedom, but the only way that you can really know what freedom is if you lose your freedom a while and have to live in the condition that we lived in. I learned what a great country we live in. We've got lots of problems, but we're by far the best country of any. And I also learned what a great God I have, because if God hadn't have carried me through this, I would have been among the 40% that died of those prisoners captured by the Japanese.